Hi there, Coachman owners. Today in your 2019 Coachmen Freelander, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install SuperSprings SumoSprings for the rear axle. Before we install our suspension enhancements, we're going to hit our test course and we're going to see how our vehicle rides. Once we get them installed, with the test course again and compare our results. We're going to start by hitting our uneven bump section here in our test course, and this is going to simulate hitting a pothole, and it's going to get us rocking back and forth. Any kind of uneven terrain or rough surfaces you drive over can make your vehicle start to sway, and that can make it difficult to maintain control. You can see when we hit those bumps, the steering wheel here wants to pull in the direction that it hits the bumps and things like that. Minimizing the sway is going to help you keep more control over your vehicle. And we are pretty bouncy right now as we're going over the bumps. You can see it in the steering wheel, we can feel it here inside. We're now heading into the even bump section, which is going to simulate a speed bump, maybe like going into a parking garage or an apartment complex. And boy, are we bouncing. You can really feel a lot of up and down movement. Even after we come off the bump, we've easily got 2 or 3 up and down oscillations before we finally settle down. Lastly, we're going to be going into our slalom section now, and this is going to simulate an evasive maneuver. And I really expect us, based on how bouncy this thing was before, that it's going to be pretty uncomfortable in here if you were to have to make any maneuvers. This is where I feel like our suspension enhancements is really going to come in handy out there and make the big difference. Oh yeah, I mean, there's even with just a little bit of movement in the wheel, this thing really wants to go left or right. I don't want to get too aggressive with it because there's so much G-force when you're pulling. It almost feels like if I were to try, there's a possibility that we could have a rollover. So we're not going to go too nuts with it. It definitely has a lot of rocking going on. So when we get our suspension enhancement on there, we're going to recheck and see how it feels. With our components installed, we're going to hit our test course once again, and we're going to start just like we did before in our uneven bump section. And you can definitely already tell a major improvement here in the uneven bump section. It doesn't hit us nearly as hard when we go back and forth. We don't have nearly as much sway. You can still see it hitting here on the steering wheel, so it is still affecting us up here. Steering stabilizers are a great suspension enhancement to help out with issues like this. But as far as our rocking, it has minimized it. This is still kind of a rocky boat. There's some more suspension enhancements that we could install on here to further improve it, but it is definitely a smoother and less bouncy ride than it was before. We're now going into the even bump section, and this is where we really notice the front bouncing a lot as well as the back. After our new components were installed, it does still have quite a bit here in the front up and down, but our back bounce is drastically minimized compared to what it used to be. We're now going to head into the slalom section where we're going to throw this guy back and forth and see how she responds. Before it was a little bit on the edge when you were really whipping her pretty good. You really got a lot of G's feeling, and it just didn't feel comfortable here inside of it, whipping it too hard. We're gonna go ahead and hit her pretty good here and see how she feels, see how comfortable we feel now. Oh yeah, I mean, it definitely still has quite a bit of pull, but it's not nearly as scary as it was before. I mean, you can definitely feel it kind of pulling us to the one side, but where we were at before, without even going nearly as hard as we were just a minute ago, I was getting uncomfortable at those kind of speeds and turns. But yeah, this feels pretty decent now. Definitely does have some sway. There is still going to be some items moving around in this motorhome, but in the event that something runs out in front of you, I would definitely feel a lot more confident that I would be in control and be able to get around whatever we have and get to our destination. And this is what our Sumo spring looks like when it's installed. It makes contact with our axle as well as the frame, and it installs in between the two. It's a replacement for your factory Jounce bumper, but the Sumo spring is going to offer its support throughout the entire travel of our suspension. Here you can see our old Jounce bumper, and when this one was installed here on the bottom, it was installed in this direction, but you can see the distance that it would hang down. And it only hangs down a few inches there, leaving us with several inches, looks like 4 or 5 more, between the axle and where our Jounce bumper even would be. So there's no frame, there's no contact with our Jounce bumper throughout most of our suspension travel. This really is just here if our suspension bottoms out, it prevents any kind of metal on metal contact. With our Sumo spring though, we've got constant contact between the two. And as our suspension gets loaded up, the Sumo spring is going to get squished and it's going to be pushing apart on our two axles here, working with the suspension system to provide additional support. Now this additional support that they provide doesn't increase the maximum carrying capacity of your vehicle, but it does help provide that support in addition with your suspension to help ease the effort that the rest of your components are exerting to support your vehicle. So what does this all mean for you? Well, this means that this is going to help extend the life of our suspension components because it's going to be working with those. It also means that our vehicle is going to be smoother in its operation because we've got constant contact, and the more we compress our spring, the more force it's going to be exerting, providing us with additional support. And it'll compress between 20 and up to 80%, providing us with varying levels of support throughout that range. The more you squish it, the more you get. This is going to work in conjunction with not only our suspension system here, so as we go over bumps, we're not going to be oscillating up and down as much, and it's going to help dampen any impacts we hit on the road, such as potholes, so we won't feel them as much when we're inside of our vehicle. It's also going to work with our sway bars, because as the body rolls, this is going to squish on one side while the other side lifts up, relieving pressure over there, and this is going to want to expand again to help bring our vehicle back upright. So it also is going to help with sway. In the end, this is going to mean there's less effort that you're going to have to exert when driving your vehicle because you're going to have extra dampening, minimizing how much the road conditions are going to affect the vehicle moving across the pavement. So you won't have to compensate left and right to keep it inside the lane, and when you hit any potholes, you're not going to feel as much of a jerk in the steering wheel. All this is going to result in you having more energy when you get to your destination so you can enjoy the things you like to do. And your passengers are going to experience this as well because they're going to have a more comfortable ride, which is also going to help increase their energy levels when they get to the destination. It's a polyurethane construction that's resistant against road grime, oils, and UV rays, so you don't have to worry about the material breaking down over time. And it's a really quick and easy installation. So if you follow along with me here, we're going to be done before you even know it. We'll begin our installation by removing our factory Jounce bumpers. We're above the rear axle here, and you can see our Jounce bumper. These are pretty loose, and they actually come out pretty easily. There's no hardware that holds it in. We're actually just going to grab it. And I'm sitting just in front of the axle, and I'm grabbing it at the back because the opening towards the back is a little wider than the one at the front. And we're just going to give it a little pull. And it comes right out of there. You can see the larger opening here towards the rear of the vehicle. Once you've got your other Jounce bumper removed, before we can put our new Sumo springs in, they're not going to fit because the clearance between the axle and the frame is going to be so tight that you'll struggle way too much to get them in there. So we're just going to put a jack underneath our hitch here at the back, and we're just going to jack it up a little bit to just increase the distance between the axle and the frame so we can get it up in there. We don't need to jack it up high enough to lift the wheels off the ground or anything crazy like that. We really just need to give ourselves a couple of inches. So that's probably good enough right there. Now, once we got it jacked up, we do want to put a jack stand underneath our vehicle, whether it be the hitch, the frame somewhere, because you don't want to support the vehicle just by a jack and be underneath of it, trusting it. We can now start installing our Sumo springs. There's blue Loctite that comes in our kit. We're going to put blue Loctite on the threads here coming out of the top of our Sumo spring. Then we're going to take the nut plate that comes included with it, and we're just going to thread it right on top like that. We only want to go on maybe about that far, just enough to where we know the threads are catching, because we'll finish threading it on once we get it up in there. We can then take our Sumo spring, we're going to take that nut plate and slide it up in the larger portion. Then we can pull it towards the front of the vehicle, and we just want to center it over our axle, and then we can just start turning our bag until it tightens down. Once we get close all the way up there towards the top, we're just going to double check ourselves, make sure that we are centered over the axle before we finish snugging it up. So we're almost all the way tight now, and while we still got it loose enough where we can move it back and forth, we're just going to get it centered. I like to just use my hands to kind of just feel on each side of the axle while I'm down here, making sure it's got about the same overhang on each side. And then we're just going to finish snugging it up. And we're just going to tighten it down by hand. And that's it. The side's installed. We'll do the same thing over on the other side to get that side installed. It is very important that you make sure you use the Loctite. There's no tools required to tighten these down. They don't need to be crazy tight, and the Loctite's what ensures they don't back off in the future. And that completes our installation of SuperSprings Sumo springs for the rear axle on our 2019 Coachmen Freelander.